My name is Andy Nobes. I work for INASP, an NGO based in Oxford in the UK. And we've been going for about 25 years. And the last 11 years, we have been running the AuthorAid program. Can I mute your microphone, actually?
Yep.
Okay. I'm getting feedback. Okay, great, thank you. So the last 11 years or so, we've been running the AuthorAid program, which is something I'll introduce in just a moment. It's the program that I work on. And the basic mission is to support research, early career researchers and other researchers in lower middle income countries, Latin America, Africa, and Asia, with research writing, proposal writing, and communicating research and publishing in journals. And so the issue of predatory journals is something that has been a big issue for us for the last 5 or so years since this phenomenon has started to appear. And so this is a key issue for us, and it's something that particularly early career researchers find particularly difficult to navigate. And it's something that we find cropping up all the time in discussions that we have in our discussion forums, in our WhatsApp groups, and all sorts of different meetings. So this is an attempt to provide some tips and resources on how to avoid such journals. I used speech marks around the word predatory because I know that for some it's quite a controversial description. Using the word predatory, it has all sorts of connotations. So I might refer to so-called predatory journals or fake journals, or just sometimes there are just very low quality journals. The reason I chose a cat for the first slide of this presentation is because it is quite a fearsome predator, particularly if you're a mouse or a bird. But for us humans, it's just a cuddly animal. And so when you know how to treat it and how dangerous it actually is, then there's nothing really to be scared about. So what I'm going to cover in this, I'm just going to do a quick introduction to what AuthorAid is, just to highlight things which may be of interest to you. Then, as a way of introducing the issue of predatory journals, I'm going to talk about how you can understand the journal publishing world and open access publishing, because I think it's important to understand how these things work before explaining what a predatory journal actually is. So I'm now going to talk about the confusing world of academic publishing. And I've been working in this area of academic publishing, journals, for about 10 years now, and I still find some components of it quite strange and confusing. And things are changing all the time with the growth of the internet and digital technologies. It can be quite difficult to keep track of what's actually going on. So the two main things I think it's important to do, if you want to understand about publishing in journals and predatory journals, you have to understand and familiarize yourself with two main things, and that's with what the major and minor journals are in your field. What are the best publishing outlets? Where do your colleagues and your peers and your research heroes, where do they publish? What journals are they publishing? What outlets? That's really important to actually familiarize yourself with what a good academic journal actually is. And it is equally important to understand what open access means, what we mean by an open access journals or publishing open access. So I'm just going to move my image. This is a typical kind of question that we get on our discussion forums from an early career researcher who's coming into this journal publishing business quite early and just wants to, he's writing some research, he or she is writing some research and wants to know where they can publish. And so they might post a question on one of our courses like this. I need to find a journal that doesn't charge a fee and can publish quickly. And I always have to say, stop. You know, just wait a minute. There's lots of things lots of questions that come out of this. And I try to break down the question. Firstly, publishing quickly is probably not going to happen, unfortunately. Peer review usually takes time. You might be able to find a journal that can publish your research in a timely manner or in with some rapid publication model, it might be quite expensive, or you might just be lucky. But generally speaking, if you're going to start looking for a journal that can publish your research quickly, you're probably going to stumble upon a predatory journal. So peer review takes time. And we're often asked about this, how can I find a journal that doesn't charge a fee? Most journals don't charge a fee to the author for one reason or another. It's only recent business models based around the open access model that are built on this author pays model. You don't normally have to pay to publish, or historically, the author hasn't paid to publish their research. So don't assume that you have to pay in the first place. There may well be other options. And the whole question of, I need to find a journal, brings up all sorts of other sub-questions that you need to think about before what journal you want to find. What's your discipline? Is it quite niche? Do you want to find quite a broad journal? What audience do you want to reach? Is it other academics? Is it the public? Is it policymakers? Is it other researchers in a particular field? Do you want or need to publish this open access, or is it fine for it to be paywalled? Does it need to be published in an international journal, or can it be a local journal or your university's journal? Does it need to be indexed in a particular place? So you may be asked to publish in a Scopus journal, for example. It may be part of the promotion criteria at your institution that it's in a Web of Science journal, or it's got a certain impact factor. And what kind of journals do your peers publish in, and your colleagues and your senior colleagues? Where do they publish? So there's lots and lots of things to think about before when you're thinking about where to publish. It's very important to choose the right journal, and it's not a quick decision that you can make just by asking a couple of people or by doing a quick Google. There are perhaps up to 60,000 scientific journals out there. Not all of them are active, but it is a very large number of journals that are available for you to publish in, to submit your work to. You don't have to submit to the first journal you come across, and unless you're very, very confident. And once you've found a suitable journal, make sure you take just at least 5 to 10 minutes checking that journal's website. And it's important that you check their website. You don't believe what you read in an email. So just some very quick links about where to look for credible journals. You can Google, but please be specific in what you're looking for. There are lots of different types of journals out there. There are very broad, top-tier journals like Science and Nature. There are international leading journals in your field. There are much more specialized niche journals, which is probably where you'll end up publishing a lot of your research. And there are much more local, regional journals that may be in your own language, or may be targeted towards the public or policymakers in your country. So there's lots to think about there. There are some websites here I've linked to. There are various different journal finder websites. You can find them on commercial publishers like Springer and Elsevier, but there's also some more neutral websites such as journalguide.com. There's also the directory of open access journals, which I'm going to mention several times. There's this really useful tool called Jane, which basically you paste in the abstract or a part of your research, and it analyzes the text that you've used and recommends journals based on the text of what you've provided. You can also just aim to use the websites of large academic publishers to look for journals there. You can either look at the big commercial publishers in the UK or the US, or more local publishers. And in this link here, a brief guide to the international research landscape, I've listed all the major publishers and all the major regional platforms, which are a really good place to start looking through their lists and their databases. And I've also recommended 2 articles, one by my colleague Ravi, How to Choose a Journal That's Right for Your Research, and another one called How to Choose a Journal and Write a Cover Letter. And probably most of the advice that I give here might be mentioned in those 2 articles. So I'm going to mention open access because it's confusing for the best of us. even when we think we've got a grasp on what it means and what gold open access is, what green open access is, we realised that we actually didn't understand it after all. So I'm going to, on this one slide, try to explain what open access is in quite a reasonably quick way. I say one slide, but actually there are about 12 slides here. So these are different ways to publish your research. You've got the traditional subscription model, which is how research has been published throughout the last century or centuries. And how this works is that basically there's no fee to the author. This is the traditional model of publishing where the people who actually pay to access the research are the readers or the librarians. So the library usually pays for a subscription to these well-established journals. This represents the majority of literature that's out there. And as the internet has grown and as more content has been digitized and put on the internet, these journals have evolved, but we still have, of course, the paywall, the big prompts that comes up when you try to access a paper and asks you for $30 or $50. And so that's the big issue here, that it's difficult for the public and those of us that don't have access to subscriptions to access the research. And so the main two ways that were identified around this was something called the hybrid route. So a lot of the commercial publishers that own these journals, existing journals, have provided a way for the authors to make those individual articles open access. So within their mostly paywalled, mostly subscription content, you may find in some journals that there are individual open access papers which you can go straight into and read. Most subscription journals actually offer this option now, and it means that the author has to pay an article processing charge or an APC. And unfortunately, this is quite expensive. It can be thousands of pounds, and the average cost is over £2,000. Another way around this problem of subscription content is something called green open access. And this basically means that the author publishes in a journal which is not open access, which is subscription only or paywalled, but they deposit a final version of their peer-reviewed paper in an institutional repository or a subject repository or a personal website. And there can be lots of different rules about what can be done with this, depending on the journal or depending on the publisher. But this is quite a common option. So, and I can give some examples in a bit. So this is either the final version of the paper that's peer reviewed before it goes on the publisher website, or there are also options called preprints, which can be put online before the peer review of the paper is actually done. And I'll go back to it. Yeah, there's a website called SheRAPO, which you can look up to find what the policies are of each individual journal to see what you can actually do. There are different rules for every journal. So this means that there is a lot of free access out there in institutional repositories, in subject repositories, in preprint repositories. And it's worth mentioning that the best ways to access this free content is either through places like Google Scholar, ResearchGate, or this really excellent app called Unpayable, which if you don't already have it installed in your browser, I would highly recommend you get, because it uses a large collection of metadata to identify what papers have been archived as green open access and links directly to them from your browser. But that's green open access, and it's quite confusing, and if necessary, I can explain more about it later. But the other model of open access is called, often referred to as the gold route, and this is for journals which are completely open access. And this is quite often the model that commercial publishers have used with individual journals. So I sometimes refer to this as commercial open access. So it's obviously free for everybody to read and share and use the content in these journals. But unfortunately, again, it costs the author usually a fee to publish in these journals, and that can range from anywhere between $100 to $4,000. And the average is about $1,600 to publish in one of these gold open access journals. However, what's not often made known to everybody is that the majority of these pure open access journals are completely free. So those that are non-commercial, which is sometimes called diamond or platinum open access, just to be confusing, are completely free to read and share, but there's also no charge to authors to publish. The cost of this journal publishing model is borne by institutions, governments, societies, and it isn't passed on to the author or the reader. And there are many thousands of examples of this on the directory of Open Access Journals website, which I will show you in a little while. So these are different open access models. And I guess the most important thing to note is that there isn't always a fee to publish your research. I'll also mention these things called mega journals. These are very large open access journals which publish a huge quantity of papers, and they use some quite innovative techniques and platforms. And you can find much more about them at a website called megajournals.info. They do have and normally charge a fee, but they're quite broad, multidisciplinary platforms. Importantly, if you do have to pay a fee to publish in a journal, sometimes in certain disciplines such as medicine, it's very difficult to find particular open access journals that are completely free, or you may be required to publish in a particular journal with a high impact factor or prestige, so you might have to pay a fee. If you're in a low middle income country, there's a good likelihood, reasonably high likelihood, that most publishers will give you a waiver or a discount on that article publishing fee. And if they don't make it obvious, it should be somewhere on their website somewhere. But if it's not obvious, always ask, because you might be surprised about what you can get. Some institutions also have arrangements with publishers to pay these APCs. And quite often, your research funder, if you're using a particular international funder, will also pay for these APCs. And they may even mandate that you publish in an open access journal, and will be willing to pay towards those fees. And finally, just to mention this SheRAPO Romeo website I mentioned, which it contains information on what the policies are for every journal. So for example, this journal here, you can archive a preprint before peer review, you can archive the postprint before it publishing, but you can't archive the official publisher's version, and you can only archive in particular places. So for example, you can put your paper in this journal on Mendeley or ResearchGate, but only after 12 months after the article has been published. So sometimes there's what's called an embargo period. It can be between 6 months or 2 years before you're actually able to share your paper in a public place. So it may be worth checking this website out at some point if you ever go to publish in a journal which is a subscription journal. So that was my attempt to summarize all the different models of open access. I've also put a bit at the bottom here that the number of open access research papers is growing. So in 2015, all those articles published that year, 45% were open access. So it's slowly growing and things are slowly improving. Whoops. And I also created this map just to briefly overview, to show that open access is global and there are different types of open access. So what I'm showing you here, these are the big commercial publishers, and they are almost all based in the US and the UK and Europe. We've got the big names like Elsevier, Wiley, Taylor and Francis, who I used to work for. And you can see them all here, all clumped up in one part of the world. This is where the majority of journals or prestige journals or high impact and international journals are. So you've got BMJ, Hindari, and you can see them all here. And then these are some of the mega journals that have been appearing, which are much bigger, multidisciplinary platforms. So things are changing, things are becoming more open access. So all of these commercial publishers have started to adopt open access models. It's not just subscription content anymore. And then we have in the so-called global south, in low and middle income countries, we have lots of other platforms which aren't always publicized as much as those publishers in the global north. We've got African Journals Online. We've got SheRAPO in Latin America, which is this really great, huge open access platform with thousands of open access journals, mostly in Spanish. There's also a version in South Africa called SheRAPO South Africa. We've got Codesria publishing journals. We've got all these other different platforms. AAS Open Research is another mega journal based in Africa, funded by African Academy of Sciences. So things are evolving, and people may not realize that there are these other journal platforms out there all over the world which contain thousands and thousands of journals, and it's not just in the global north. And I've colored these all in kind of an orange color because these are almost all open access platforms. Just to show you that open access is very much a global movement, and it's actually more in the global south than it is in the global north. At this point, I wanted to mention DearAJ again, as I said earlier, and actually show you the websites to demonstrate something which I said earlier, that open access journals are mostly free. So this is the Directory of Open Access Journals, DearAJ.org. And if we go to the journal section and scroll down the list, you will see that in some places it mentions an article processing charge. So this one's $200. This one's £630. But most of them don't have a fee. There's no fee. The majority of open access journals are completely free. And you can see there's a statistic here. Those with article processing charges around 3,600 and those without around nearly 10,000. This is a really good website to look for journals and to look for open access research. And these are all credible journals which have passed a certain rigorous criteria to check that they've got good digital publishing practices. So this is the place to look if you want to find an open access journal which you can be reasonably confident isn't a predatory publisher, and particularly look out for those with the gold seal, the DearAJ seal, which have got particularly good digital publishing practices. Okay, back to the presentation. So that's DearAJ.org, a really good resource. So now on to the meat of the presentation. What actually is a predatory journal? And many people have tried to define what a predatory journal is, and it's very hard to do because it requires a certain amount of critical thinking skills and human judgment skills, rather than it being something that an app or database can identify. The way that I would define a predatory journal, it is a very low quality publishing outlet that charges a fee to publish your paper, but doesn't provide you a service that you would expect from an academic or scientific journal. So anybody can publish a PDF on the internet. It's really easy to do. What exactly are academic journals providing on top of this, which means that you have to pay for somebody to put your PDF on the internet? So what I'm saying is that predatory journal, it's all about false advertising. It's all about what they say that they're offering you, when in fact all they're doing is putting a PDF somewhere on the internet. Now, we've got these things called blacklists and whitelists, which you may have heard of, particularly something called Beall's List. And this was started by a librarian called Jeffrey Beall in America many years ago. And in fact, it's been discontinued in 2017. So it is still online somewhere, and it's a huge list of so-called predatory journals, which he found himself, but it's not up to date anymore. There's an archive version of it at that link, which is kind of useful, but it's also highly disputed and a bit out of date. We've also got a company called Cabell's who run a blacklist, and it's supposed to be really good. They've got a whole team that are assessing journals, but it's paid. It's a paid service, and I don't know anybody that uses it because I think it's quite expensive.
There are also these things called whitelists, which is the exact opposite. So it shows you what a good journal is, and DearAJ is an example of this. Cabell's, again, they do their own whitelist, but again, it's a paid service, so I've never actually seen it, but I expect it's pretty good. Other things that I'd call whitelists are the very prestigious databases called Web of Science, Scopus, and PubMed, or Medline, which I will talk about now because I think it's important to recognize what these are. So many people are critical of some of these things, such as the Web of Science or Scopus, because they're not very geographically diverse. But if you want to publish in a journal which is advertising they're indexed in these databases, then it's important to go and check that they actually are indexed here, particularly when you find a journal which advertises that it has an impact factor. Now, I'm not going to go too much into depth about what an impact factor is. I'll mention that in just a moment. But if a journal says it's got an impact factor, then you need to check that the journal is indexed in the Clarivate Web of Science. This is previously called the Thomson Reuters database. It's called all sorts of things, actually, such as the Science Citation Index, the JCR. But this link here, this mga.clarivate.com, is the place to look and check that the journal is actually in this database. If it's not in this database, then it does not have an impact factor as the majority of scientists would understand it. Similarly, Scopus is another decent database. It's a good indication that the journal is high quality and credible. It's actually more geographically diverse than the Web of Science, so it's slightly better. And it's got this indicator called site score, which is similar to impact factor. And you can search for journals at this link at SciMajoJR. That's actually it's a really good website because it gives you lots of stats on journals. And yeah, it's good to check there also. For medical journals, there is something called PubMed or Medline. And lots of medical journals claim to be indexed here. Lots of predatory journals claim to be indexed here, but they're not. And I will probably show you an example of this later. If you find a journal in here, check that it actually says it's indexed in Medline, because this is the important database. And there's a really rigorous criteria that journals have to go through, well, to get into all three of these databases, but particularly into Medline. And then, of course, we've got the Directory of Open Access Journals, which is another good, important journal index. I said I wasn't going to talk about the impact factor, but I've got a slide here about the impact factor. It's important to note that a journal doesn't have to have an impact factor to be a credible journal. In fact, most credible journals don't have them because it's so difficult to get into the Web of Science, particularly if you're not based in Europe or America. But the most important things, as I've said, make sure that a journal is actually indexed in the Web of Science if it claims it has an impact factor. Otherwise, it's probably lying. And watch out for fake impact factors. There's lots of different fake impact factors: the universal impact factor, global impact factor. They've all got different names, but they're not based on the same data as Clarivate provides. So always check their claims. So moving on then to some tips. And I think the top tip, the one tip to rule them all, the top tip is you don't need to pay to publish in the journal. Always. Sometimes you might have to, but if you're quoted over $100 or so to publish your paper, you should expect a certain service, a certain amount of quality in return, particularly for it to be indexed in one of these databases that we've already mentioned. It doesn't have to be indexed there, but if you're paying to publish in one of these journals, then you need to have a certain amount of indexing and services and other things, such as obviously peer review. So if you're promised a very rapid peer review service and everything goes through in about a week and you get very good comments saying, yeah, this is great, publish straight away, then that's probably not a credible peer review. You're also paying for a certain amount of publishing quality. So the digital infrastructure, you're given something called DOI. There's archiving of your work, which is permanent. Your work is obviously disseminated to reads.
And of course, indexing and a certain amount of prestige and recognition. But remember also that there are actually journals that provide some or all of this absolutely for free as well. But if you are going to pay, then make sure you get all these things, or most of these things. So some quick tips. This is based on an article on the AuthorAid website. Probably the number 2 tip is don't trust email invites. Don't trust call for papers unless you recognize the sender or you've signed up to a certain website for alerts and they highlight a new special issue that's coming up. Do not trust emails inviting you to submit to a journal you've never heard of, particularly if they lavish you with praise and amazing language. So if you follow those top 2 things, be careful about paying for publishing and don't trust email invites, then you've probably avoided 99% of predatory journals already. But here are some other tips. Be skeptical of international or global journals. If a journal claims to be international, then you should look at it extra critically, particularly those that have a huge scope, a wide scope, such as International Journal of Research, International Journal of Social Science. If it's both international and has a broad scope, then there has to be a very professional publishing outfit behind a journal like that has access to a large group of peer reviewers and editorial board and digital infrastructure to publish that amount of papers that they do. Double check claims of prestigious indexing and impact factors, which I've already mentioned. Another really good way is to read the journal website when it talks about its aims and scopes, or just simply its about page. Quite often, this is where predatory journals slip up because it's quite obvious that they don't understand the subject that they're talking about. And I'll show you an example of that later. Also check who is publishing the journal and why. Quite often with credible journals, there's a society behind this journal, or an institution, or a group of scholars. There's an obvious reason why this journal is being published and why it's interested in the science itself. Sometimes with predatory journals, well, always with predatory journals, it's just a commercial publishing outfit and there's no link with any credible scholarly organization. Another good tip is just to check your reference lists. So if you're familiar with the journals in your field, and if you're reading looking at your reference list, following the links, see who cites who, then you'll be familiar with what all the good journals in your field are, and then you won't slip up when a predatory journal comes knocking at your door or in your inbox, because you already know how to spot a good journal. I'm now going to show you some examples and go through some web pages of good journals and bad journals. And I'm going to have at my fingertips some useful websites. So I've got here the directory of open access journals. I have got the Clarivate master journal list, which I can search for journals in. I've got Scopus, this is the SciMagi journal and country rank, which I can search in. And I've got the, this is PubMed, or the NLM catalog. And these are all the links that were in the presentation earlier. And I forgot to say, I'll share the presentation later so you can follow all these links and check out these websites. So the first journal I wanted to look at, it's called Archives of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation. Firstly, this is an Elsevier journal, so it's a large commercial publisher. And so you would think that we can trust this journal. And actually, one interesting thing I think about this journal, they're saying who their editor-in-chief is. I think it's quite a good tip actually sometimes to look at the editorial board, check out the editor, do a quick Google of him. In fact, in this example, I'm going to do this because I think I looked at this before. I Googled the editor and I think actually it doesn't come up with it immediately now, but before, when I looked for this guy, it came up with his institutional profile page, and it mentioned that he was an editor of the journal. I can't find it right this second, but it's often a good idea to Google the editor-in-chief. So this journal here is
this is a traditional paywalled journal, but it does have some open access papers in it. So this is what we might call the hybrid model. You can see these two papers here are open access. The one in the middle, I will hit a paywall, it will ask me for some money. It claims to have an impact factor. So this is supposedly indexed in the Clarivate analytics, as we can see from the text there. It also says it has a site score, which is Scopus, SheRAPO. So let's do a really quick check and see, let's check if this is actually true or not. Now, all journals usually give you their ISSN, which is their, I've forgotten what ISSN stands for, but it's their the number that they're allocated by a certain international body, which you can check, which is particularly useful if you want to check in places like the master journal list. So I'm going to go in here, I'm going to put the ISSN in, I'm going to change this to ISSN, I'm going to do a quick search, and there it is. There's the archives of physical medicine and rehabilitation. It is indexed in 3 different parts of the Web of Science. So straight away, we know that the claims of this journal are true. So as I said earlier, this is a hybrid journal. It supports open access. So we click on this link and it will tell us all about what you want to do if you want to publish your research open access. So it says that there's actually a choice, gold open access or subscription. And as you can see, it's quite an expensive journal. It's $3,500 to publish in this journal. Or you can just publish for free under the subscription model and perhaps look at where you can deposit the paper. So that's one journal. This is another journal. This is a publisher called Hindawi. Now, I think it's important to bring up Hindawi because this is a publisher that used to be, was mentioned on the Beals list I mentioned earlier in error. Perhaps a bit of an oversight by Jeffrey Beal, and it's mentioned on Beal's list, and for quite a long time people thought this was a predatory publisher. So we're going to have a quick look at this publisher. I actually know that this is a good publisher because I know somebody that works there. It says it's an open access journal. This is the Journal of Immunology Research. It says it's APC here, $1,900. It actually gives you an indication of how long it takes to get published there, 35 days. And so let's look at, so we can look at all sorts of things. We can look at their editorial board, but let's look at their abstracting and indexing. So this journal says it's published in Scopus. It's also got Medline, and it's also got lots of indexing here, some both large indexing and more smaller niche areas. Journal citation reports, so that is Clarivate and the Directory of Open Access Journals. Now let's quickly check Scopus. So this is the Journal of Immunology Research, and I'm going to go to Scopus or SheRAPO, and I'm going to put the name of the journal in here, and there we go. So this is, I can see that sometimes journals have very similar names, but this one is published by Hindawi. They used to be based in Egypt, actually, but their head office is actually now in the UK. And so we can go in and we can see, check their details, and we can see all sorts of stats about the journal, which is great. But this is definitely indexed in Scopus. So a quick look at this journal, I can see that it's probably fine. I mean, there are other things I could look at. I could look at the editor and various articles and see how much they're published, but I'm fine with this one for now. So let's move on to another journal. And this is another open access journal. In fact, I think we're probably quite short on time, so perhaps I should go ahead to a bad example of a journal. So let's look at some bad examples. Right. This is the International Journal of Development Research. Now, straight away, I said be skeptical of international journals. Just be extra critical, really. There are some good journals calling themselves international, but I'm going to be extra skeptical about this one because straight away,
I'm spotting some funny things on this page. So they said they've got an impact factor. I'm going to be skeptical about that. One thing to look out for is, as a red flag, are certificates of an impact factor, which is fake. So don't be fooled by these. This is something called the scientific journal impact factor, not the impact factor that we would understand. So that's to check these claims of impact factor. If you're going to call, if your journal, you're going to say you've got an impact factor, then it's important that you back this up. So I'm going to have a quick look. I've got an ISSN here, 22309926. Remembered it? No, it's not in there. So it's not in the database that it perhaps claims to be published in. So straight away, I don't trust this journal because it is claiming to be published somewhere, to be indexed somewhere, which I don't think is true. I'm also going to look at the abstracting and indexing page. Now, this is another red flag. A lot of predatory journals do this, and virtually no credible journals do it. And that's, they put loads of logos all over their pages to try and confuse people and think that they're credible and they've got all these links to other organizations. In all of these cases, virtually all of these links, they're not really indexing databases which are of any use to us. They mention Google Scholar, but it's very easy to get indexed in Google Scholar. They mention Mendeley twice. They mentioned EndNote. These aren't academic databases. Neither is Archive, neither is academia.edu. And I don't have time to check, but I very much doubt that they're indexed in the directory of open access journals. Whenever you see this collection of colorful logos, that's a red flag to watch out for. Another journal, which is called International, and another reason why I am skeptical of this is it's called the International Journal of Advanced Research. So again, a very, very broad scope. And the reason they do this is to try to catch as many people as possible to want to publish in their journal. Generally speaking, as an early career researcher, it's more likely that you're going to publish in a more niche, targeted journal, specialized on a particular topic, rather than going straight into an international journal that's with a broad scope. So that's one reason to just to be skeptical. It's not necessarily a reason to completely dismiss it, but as we look down, again, they've got this big mishmash of supposed journal indexes, none of which are really that useful apart from DearAJ. So let's check DearAJ. So I'm going to copy the name of the journal. I'm going to go to the Directory of Open Access Journals, click on search again, and click on journals. And I'm going to put the name of the journal in the box and search for it. Now there's two journals with similar names, but not the same. So it's the International Journal of Advanced Research we're looking for, and it's not here. There's Advanced Research in Engineering, which is a completely different journal. But there's, yeah, again, we find that this journal is not living up to its claims. It is not indexed in the Directory of Open Access Journals. So just these little things that you can spot without doing a really advanced dive into the journal and everything on their website. You can just spot these things which show that they're being dishonest. Also, my favorite thing about this journal, the editor-in-chief is called Dr. Morse Floss. And I can tell you that no such person exists. So I've Googled them a lot. And it's a funny made-up name. And sometimes you can just spot funny names and you can just tell. So it also says United Kingdom, doesn't give an institution, doesn't give a university, but gives a cell number. So yes, this is another very badly put together journal. The last one I'm going to show you, because I know that time's running out. This is a publisher called Omics. And whilst sometimes I have to be careful about accusing certain publishers of malpractice, this publisher was featured in a lawsuit in the United States, and they were sued because of false advertising. Basically, they were exposed
as a predatory publisher. They've got hundreds and hundreds, well, 700 journals actually. And they're a very low quality publisher. They may do some peer review, but please try and steer clear of them. They claim to have an impact factor, but this is not based on what we would consider the data we need in Web of Science. They say they're indexed in Publons, which isn't isn't a journal index, it's a peer review platform. And again, Google charge, and I'll try and find the fee for publishing if I can. Let me see if I can find article processing charges. Right, how much do they charge? Actually, I'm not sure because there's a huge long list, but anywhere between $500 and $2,000 for publishing in their journals, which I know for certain aren't very good quality. They're not indexed anywhere useful or prestigious, not even in the directory of open access journals, because DearAJ are aware of this publisher. Now, the best thing for me about this journal, this is the Journal of Mass Communication and Journalism. So this is an example of why you should read the website of the publisher to try to get a feel of their understanding of your topic. So if you're a researcher in communication and journalism, you might read down this section called About the Journal. And suddenly some things pop out at you, such as this. This is a description of the internet. The internet is an alternative media that can be used to perform investor relations activities more efficiently. In this case, internet is linking the quality of information that can be given to investors. So this journal doesn't understand what the internet is, and yet it's a journal of communication. And then the more you scroll down, the more you see very strange, silly things, such as there's something here about untreated oral disease and missing teeth. So basically, they've taken some of these phrases that they think might be relevant to the journal, they've put them in Google, they've probably gone to Wikipedia and copy and pasted some paragraphs of text to bulk out the journal homepage to make it look like a credible journal. But all you have to do is actually read what they've written, and you should be able to spot that not all is right with this journal. Right, so those are some examples, and I'm quite happy to send on some more examples by email later, or take questions, but I'm just going to round off with some final tips. Finally, there is a website called Think Check Submit, which provides a checklist of things that you can look out for to check that a journal is credible, such as check out the editorial board. Has it got any researchers that you recognize, or famous researchers you recognize in your field? Check the address of the journal. This is one that I haven't had time to look at, but quite often these addresses are postal addresses, forwarding addresses, or sometimes they're even in the middle of a field or a very small residential property. Watch out for the phrase rapid publication. Often this, unless it's a really good high quality publisher, this means that they're trying to sell you a service which doesn't include rigorous peer review. Often poor English is a giveaway. And I don't mean just the odds typo, but English which has clearly been put through Google Translate to translate something, and it's very clumsy and poorly worded. And also, I didn't get time to mention Creative Commons, but I think it's already been mentioned in the workshop. But if you are publishing open access, you should be retaining your copyright. If you're not, then start to ask questions and be concerned. You should be retaining copyright, and the research should be published with a Creative Commons license. So don't sign over your rights, don't sign over your copyright without being 100% sure of what you're doing, because once you've signed over copyright, it's very hard to get the publisher to take the paper down or to do anything else with your paper. So that is the end of my presentation. Sorry I overran slightly, but I'm very happy to take any questions